Ordered to the floor. That's the official business before the committee this morning, but as I mentioned earlier, if anyone would like to be recognized at this point, I will do so.
I know Senator Lee does. One thing I forgot to mention, next Wednesday, I'm going to the floor and ask unanimous consent to bring to the floor all the bills passed by this committee in a bipartisan basis on social media. I'll give you the time and date. I'd love it if the committee would join me in that endeavor.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Lee, do you seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, look, we do have a problem with immigration, and the problem is becoming more apparent every day. And media accounts seem to be trickling in at a steadier pace. You know, from a source no more right-wing than the Washington Post, I learned yesterday about a Maryland toddler's murder, the murder at the hands of an illegal immigrant. Really is tragic. Tragic just as the murder of Lake and Bradley. It was tragic. Just as it's tragic that we've seen just in the last 4 or 5 days alone instances of rape and murder, very often rape and murder involving children from illegal aliens. Now, when people come into our country, we don't know who they are. We don't know what background they have. We have to assume, we should assume, that they might be fleeing another country under circumstances in which they're not welcome in that country. We know that because many of them are. We know that there are some countries who, in recent years, have been actively, let's just say, encouraging some of their most unsavory characters to leave their country, and in some cases expelling them, knowing that they may well end up in the United States after paying many, many thousands of dollars to drug cartels that are being enriched to the tune of tens of billions of dollars every year, smuggling human traffic and with it a lot of drug traffic into the United States. So when we admit people without knowing who they are, we shouldn't act all that surprised when there's a disproportionate crime rate among that cohort. This isn't something we can just ignore. It's something that we do need to address. Now, I also want to address the point made by the chairman a moment ago, suggesting that Republicans turned on a dime against immigration reform, against border reform, efforts to secure the border on a bipartisan basis. You know, it's true that all but 4 Republicans voted not to bring debate to a close on proceeding to some legislation attached to the Ukraine supplemental bill that had been negotiated by 2 Democrats and a Republican with some assistance from a few other colleagues. Number one, in my view, the 45th president was not a fan, but long before he weighed in, a lot of members were already expressing dissatisfaction based on what little we knew at the time about the bill. And it's not that the bipartisan effort led on our side by Senator Langford, it's not that it didn't reflect a lot of good work. It's not that it didn't involve a lot of hard effort, a lot of sweat, blood, and tears. It is rather that it didn't accomplish what the overwhelming majority, ultimately all but 4 members of our minority party, asked for and expected and wanted. You know, it was about 3 months ago when we decided as a Senate Republican conference that given that most or all Democrats really eager to get Ukraine funding out the door, more so than Republicans, and all Republicans, I think without exception, really wanted to see the border secured, and we saw this as possibly a chance to achieve both ends, to do both of them. Some on both sides would have to vote for something they might not otherwise vote for in order to get something significant. But the charge, as most of us understood it on our side of the aisle, was that this would need to be legislation that would force the administration's hand, leaving it little option but to actually secure the border, to bring about changes like the restoration of Remain in Mexico, the Migrant Protection Protocol, Safe Third Country Agreements, and anything akin to catch and release, and the practice of allowing people to come in without documentation, immediately submit an asylum claim, be processed, and then given a plane ticket to the U.S. city of their choice and be told at some point in the distant future you'll receive a notice that you should come to your immigration court hearing. We encourage you to do so. And by the way, that probably won't occur until the mid-2030s. And also, by the way, 180 days from now, you may apply for and will almost certainly receive a work permit. There's nothing in federal law that requires that to happen. In fact, asylum is itself a discretionary authority. It's not an individual right for any person. No one has a vested right to receive asylum. It is rather a discretionary authority granted to the Secretary of Homeland Security, who may, where certain conditions precedent have been satisfied, may choose to grant them asylum. And so when our bed space is full, they're supposed to be detained when they come across without documentation, even if they apply for asylum. But what this administration has been doing is saying we don't have nearly the space for this, because they've been letting too many in, and because they've also been not too eager to expand bed space, to say the least, and been closing down some of the facilities. But regardless, when bed space is at a premium, they just say, okay, well, come on in then. We'll let you stay here for a while meaning a decade or more. This was the part of the problem that manifested itself initially, and then it metastasized into other things like the categorical use of parole. Parole is supposed to be used in two circumstances. You've got the public need. There's some reason why that person needs to be inside the country for the benefit of the American people. Classic example of this is somebody speaks an obscure language. We need an interpreter who can speak English and that language. We can't find that kind of qualified person in the United States. We bring them in, temporarily allowed to be in the country under the public use, public necessity prong of immigration parole. And they can stay here for a short period of time, then go home. Then there's the humanitarian component where, if somebody's mother dies, they're outside the United States, they've got no other way to get into the country. Here again, as a matter of discretion, Homeland Security can grant parole, but it's to be made clear, this is not to occur categorically ever. It's supposed to be an individualized case-by-case basis based on the totality of those circumstances and whether they fall into one of these categories. Instead, this administration has been admitting many, many hundreds of thousands of these folks a year under categorical parole, saying we'll accept this money from this country, this money from this country. So when we finally got the draft, it's either 24 or 48 hours before we were expected to cast the first vote, our concerns had materialized, and there was nothing in there that would remedy the most significant components of the parole problem or of the amnesty or the asylum problem. Nothing in there requiring the administration to reinstitute Remain in Mexico, the Migrant Protection Protocol, the Safe Third Country Agreements. There were some things in there that I think had some potential to do some good, but those things that had the potential to do some good, and I think would do some good under a different administration, did contain some loopholes, and those loopholes were significant. They were especially significant in the first few years, meaning if the Biden administration still didn't want to secure the border, because we know that it doesn't, because we know that it has more than enough authority to do this, then it would have done so by now. And so we weren't willing to just take that gamble. It wasn't worth it to us to spend, another $100 billion or so on a supplemental aid package in return for something that might not make that big of a difference on border security. Now, what would a normal legislative body have done at that point? Where there was, I think, a genuine desire to achieve bipartisan compromise. I think a normal legislative body in that circumstance would have said, okay, let's figure out what will work. Let's figure out what could get Republicans comfortable with supporting cloture on the motion to proceed to the bill. This didn't do it for them. Let's figure out whether that is. Instead, that was just brushed under the rug, notwithstanding the commitments made by Republicans to Republicans that we wouldn't move forward with this unless most of us were satisfied. It was brushed under the rug and said, that's it. So again, President Trump, yeah, he weighed in, but a lot of us were deeply concerned long before he weighed in. Certainly, in my case, I don't know any of my colleagues whose opinions changed after and as a result of President Trump weighing in. I think he was just reacting to the same realities that we were. So, look, to say that there was no will on the part of Republicans to achieve a bipartisan compromise isn't true, isn't fair. To say that Donald Trump did this isn't true, isn't fair. This is about the fact that we've got to get away from this system that says 3 members of the Senate can go in and write something down, and then we're going to treat that as if it were engraved on stone tablets, and it can't be changed. And we can't go back to the drawing board. Instead, the Senate just went right along and voted this thing through. And I was stunned, frankly, when 17 of my Republican colleagues voted with every Democrat except Bernie Sanders in order to bring debate to a close, not even allowing us, I and a number of my colleagues submitted amendments to the Ukraine bill, amendments that could have and should have been at least allowed to be called up and debated. I tried to call up a bunch of them, a bunch of amendments. And every single time, Democrats objected. And keep in mind, I wasn't asking unanimous consent to pass them, to adopt them. I was just asking consent that they be made pending. And even that was too much. Notwithstanding the fact that we were blocked out of any opportunity to improve the bill, 17 of my Republican colleagues joined with the Democrats in order to shut us out and then passed it.
Senator, can you allow one of your
I'm
colleagues
finished.
to speak?
That's it. I'm
That's
finished.
it.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Senator Coons?